In quiet towns, tragedies often unfold silently. There are no alarms, no warnings loud enough to stop what is coming. Just ordinary days that suddenly turn into irreversible nightmares. This is one such story, the story of Brooke Strattan, a 24-year-old woman whose life ended far too soon, and whose disappearance exposed a pattern of fear, violence, and chilling confessions that would haunt an entire community. Before her name appeared in police reports, court documents, and news headlines, Brooke Strattan was a daughter, a friend, and a young woman quietly trying to build a life. She was 24 years old, living in McFarland, Wisconsin, a small community where serious crime was rare and people often felt safe walking familiar streets. Those who knew Brooke described her as gentle, thoughtful, and emotionally open. She had a soft presence, the kind of person who listened more than she spoke, who cared deeply about animals, music, and the people around her. Friends would later say she was the type of person who felt things intensely, who loved with her whole heart, and who sometimes put others' needs before her own. Brooke's life, on the surface, looked ordinary. She worked, maintained friendships, and navigated the same uncertainties that many young adults face. There were no public signs that her life was heading toward tragedy, no criminal history, no dramatic social media posts hinting at danger. Nothing that suggested her name would one day be spoken in courtrooms and memorials. But like many true crime stories, the reality was far more complex than it appeared. Behind the scenes, Brooke was involved in a relationship that would later be described by investigators as volatile and abusive. At the time, however, very few people understood the extent of what she was experiencing. Domestic violence rarely announces itself loudly. More often, it hides in private moments, in fear expressed quietly, in journal pages never meant to be read, and in text messages sent to trusted friends late at night. Brooke's relationship with James Barnes Morris did not immediately raise alarms within her wider social circle. To outsiders, they appeared like many couples, together, then apart, then together again. But relationships marked by control and violence often follow that exact pattern. As time passed, Brooke began documenting her feelings privately. In journals later reviewed by investigators, she described moments of fear and physical harm. These entries were not written for attention or sympathy. They were written for survival, a way to process what she was living through. In one journal entry dated August 18, 2024, Brooke wrote about being beaten and nearly killed. The words were not dramatic or exaggerated. They were matter of fact, written by someone who understood the danger she was in but may not yet have known how to escape it. This is a critical detail in understanding Brooke's story. Many victims of abusive relationships do not immediately leave. Fear, emotional attachment, financial concerns, and hope that things will change often keep people trapped far longer than outsiders expect. Brooke's writing suggests she was aware of the risk, but awareness does not always equal escape. Friends later recalled that Brooke sometimes seemed anxious, withdrawn, or emotionally exhausted. Yet she was also fiercely independent in spirit. She loved music, often using it as a form of comfort. She loved animals, finding peace in caring for creatures that offered unconditional trust. Her father would later describe her as someone with a deeply caring heart, someone who felt responsibility for others, even when it came at a personal cost. As summer turned into fall in 2024, Brooke's internal conflict intensified. According to investigators, she expressed fear about seeing her boyfriend. In text messages reviewed later by police, Brooke allegedly told someone that she was afraid he might kill her. These were not casual words. They were warnings. On September 29, 2024, the day before she vanished, Brooke communicated with others in a way that would later feel haunting. There was hesitation, fear, a sense that something bad could happen. But like many victims, Brooke continued forward, possibly believing she could manage the situation, or that the danger would pass. The following day, September 30th, Brooke was seen walking near O'Donnell Road and Whitney Way in Madison. It was not a secluded area. Cars passed by, businesses were open. People went about their routines. It would be the last confirmed sighting of her alive. When Brooke failed to return home and stopped responding to messages, her absence was immediately noticed. This was not someone who disappeared without explanation. Her family knew something was wrong. When Brooke failed to return home and stopped responding to messages, her absence was immediately noticed. This was not someone who disappeared without explanation. Her family knew something was wrong. A missing person report was filed. Police began asking questions. Flyers began circulating online. Friends shared photos of Brooke, urging anyone with information to come forward. At this stage, there was still hope. Hope that she had simply gone somewhere to clear her head. Hope that she would be found safe. Hope that fear had not become reality. But as hours turned into days, that hope began to fade. Investigators started piecing together Brooke's last known movements. They spoke to people she had contacted. They reviewed text messages. And slowly, attention began shifting toward the person who had been closest to her, and who, according to her own words, she feared the most. James Barnes Morris. At this early stage, nothing had been proven, but patterns were emerging. Brooke's writings, her messages, her fear. They were no longer private thoughts. They were potential evidence. What no one yet knew was that within days, the search for Brooke would lead to a devastating discovery, one that would confirm the worst fears of her family and change everything. In the next chapter, we will examine the relationship Brooke was trying to survive, the warning signs that were present long before she disappeared, and the psychological patterns that often trap victims in dangerous situations until it is too late. To understand what happened to Brooke Strattan, investigators knew they first had to understand the relationship she was living inside. Not the version seen from the outside, but the one documented quietly, in journals, in messages, and in moments of fear shared with only a few trusted people. Abusive relationships rarely begin with violence. They begin with connection, attention, and trust. Over time, control replaces care, fear replaces safety, and the victim often becomes isolated, emotionally and psychologically, long before the abuse becomes visible. According to court documents and police reports, Brooke's relationship with James Barnes Morris followed this familiar and dangerous pattern. At first, there was nothing publicly alarming. Friends did not report immediate red flags. There were no police calls in the early stages, no public confrontations that drew attention. This quiet beginning is important, because it explains why the danger went largely unseen. But privately, Brooke's experience was very different. In journal entries later reviewed by investigators, Brooke described moments of fear and physical harm. These entries were written months before her disappearance, showing that the danger was not sudden, it was building. In one entry dated August 18, 2024, Brooke wrote about being beaten and nearly killed. The language was not dramatic. It was calm, factual, and deeply disturbing. This is a common trait in abuse documentation. Victims often write not to convince others, but to convince themselves that what they are experiencing is real. Investigators would later describe these journal entries as a crucial insight into Brooke's mental state. They showed awareness, fear, and a growing sense that her safety was at risk. Yet despite this awareness, Brooke remained connected to Barnes Morris. This is where many outsiders struggle to understand cases like this. The question is often asked, why didn't she leave? The answer is rarely simple. Fear plays a central role: fear of escalation, fear of retaliation, fear of being followed, fear of not being believed. Emotional attachment also plays a role. Abusive partners often alternate between violence and remorse, creating a cycle that traps victims emotionally. Hope becomes a powerful force, hope that things will change, hope that the person they first fell for will return. Brooke's writing suggests she was caught in this cycle. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Brooke's fear intensified. According to investigators, she sent text messages expressing hesitation about seeing Barnes Morris. In at least one message, she reportedly told someone that she was afraid he might kill her. These were not vague concerns. They were direct expressions of fear. This detail would later weigh heavily on the case, because it showed Brooke was aware of the potential danger immediately before she vanished. Despite this fear, Brooke still met with him. This moment, the decision to meet despite fear, is tragically common in domestic violence cases. Victims often believe they can manage the situation, de-escalate conflict, or end things safely. Many underestimate how dangerous the final interactions can be. Investigators would later examine Brooke's last known movements closely. On September 30, 2024, she was seen walking near O'Donnell Road and Whitney Way in Madison. It was not a private or isolated area. Nothing about the location suggested imminent danger. But danger does not always announce itself with chaos. After that sighting, Brooke disappeared. As police began investigating, they reviewed Brooke's communications, writings, and the history of her relationship. What they found painted a consistent picture, not of a sudden argument gone wrong, but of an escalating situation filled with warning signs. Witnesses later told police that Barnes-Morris had a controlling presence. Some recalled tension in the relationship. Others reported statements he made after Brooke vanished that suggested knowledge no one else should have had. But even before those statements emerged, Brooke's own words told a story of fear. Domestic violence experts often emphasize that the most dangerous time for a victim is when they begin to pull away or consider leaving. Control feels threatened. Tension escalates. Violence becomes more unpredictable. Investigators believe Brooke may have been in that critical phase. Her journal entries, text messages, and behavior suggested she was becoming more aware of the risk. She was documenting it. She was talking about it. She was afraid. But fear alone does not always create escape. Isolation plays a key role. Victims may feel embarrassed, ashamed, or worried they won't be believed. They may fear judgment. They may fear making the situation worse. Brooke's case highlights how quietly this isolation can happen. To many around her, Brooke was still living her life, still working, still communicating, still present. But internally, she was carrying a burden few could see. As investigators continued building the case, they began connecting Brooke's documented fear with the behavior of Barnes-Morris after her disappearance. Statements attributed to him would later suggest not only involvement, but a disturbing lack of remorse. Friends reported that Barnes-Morris made comments about disposing of a body, referencing weeds in a pond. These statements would become a chilling focal point of the investigation, but at this stage in the timeline, they had not yet surfaced publicly. What police already knew, however, was enough to raise serious concern. Brooke's disappearance was not random. It was not unexplained. It was deeply connected to the relationship she feared. And as days passed without answers, investigators shifted from searching for a missing woman to preparing for the possibility that they were investigating a homicide. The community still hoped for a different outcome. Friends still shared Brooke's photo. Family members still waited for a call that never came. But the evidence was moving in one direction. In the next chapter, we will follow the investigation step by step, from the search efforts to the discovery in the retention pond, and the moments that turned fear into confirmed tragedy. By the morning of October 1, 2024, the silence surrounding Brooke Strattan had become impossible to ignore. Messages went unanswered. Calls were not returned. For someone who was known to stay in touch with people close to her, this absence was deeply unsettling. At first, there was hope that the silence had a harmless explanation, a dead phone, a change of plans, a misunderstanding. But as hours turned into a full day, concern turned into alarm. Brooke had last been seen on September 30th, walking near the intersection of O'Donnell Road and Whitney Way in Madison, Wisconsin. It was a familiar area, not far from businesses, traffic, and residential spaces. There were no immediate reports of distress, no signs of a struggle, and no witnesses who saw anything overtly suspicious at the time. That lack of visible chaos would later complicate the investigation. When a person disappears from a public area without witnesses, investigators must reconstruct events almost entirely from fragments, timelines, phone data, surveillance footage, and behavioral patterns. Every minute detail matters. Police were notified when Brooke failed to show up and could not be reached. A missing person report was filed, and officers began working to establish her last known movements. One of the first steps was identifying who Brooke had been in contact with before she disappeared. That quickly led investigators back to James Barnes-Morris. At this stage, he was not publicly labeled a suspect. He was considered a person of interest, someone who had recent contact with Brooke and could potentially provide information about her whereabouts. Police spoke with him, gathering statements and observing behavior. As in many cases, what someone says, and how they say it, becomes just as important as what they don't say. Investigators also began canvassing the area where Brooke was last seen. They checked nearby businesses for security cameras. They reviewed traffic footage. They retraced possible walking routes. Nothing immediately explained where Brooke had gone. Meanwhile, friends and family mobilized. Flyers were shared online. Photos circulated on social media. People who had never met Brooke joined search efforts, walking trails, checking public spaces, and hoping to find some sign, anything, that would bring her home. Search efforts expanded to nearby parks and green spaces, including areas with water features. These locations are often examined not because of certainty, but because they are common along walking routes and can conceal evidence. As days passed, anxiety deepened. Investigators began analyzing Brooke's phone activity. Records showed no activity after her disappearance. No outgoing messages. No incoming responses. No location updates that suggested movement. This digital silence reinforced what many feared, that Brooke was no longer able to communicate. Attention increasingly focused on Barnes-Morris. Witnesses began coming forward with statements about things he had said after Brooke went missing. According to police reports, some of these remarks were disturbing, comments about bodies and disposal that raised immediate red flags. These were not confessions, but they were statements that suggested a level of knowledge that did not align with concern for a missing person. Investigators also compared these statements with Brooke's journal entries and messages expressing fear. The pattern was becoming difficult to ignore. Still, without physical evidence, police could not make an arrest. Search teams continued working methodically. Retention ponds and nearby water areas were examined carefully. These searches are slow, emotionally draining, and often conducted under the weight of knowing that answers may be devastating. On October 5, 2024, that fear became reality. Brooke Strattan's body was discovered in a retention pond near Whitney Way and O'Donnell Road, the same general area where she had last been seen days earlier. The discovery marked a turning point in the case. What had been a missing person investigation immediately became a homicide investigation. Authorities secured the scene and began the process of evidence collection. Out of respect for Brooke and her family, officials released limited public details about the condition of her body. What mattered most was the confirmation of what many had feared. Brooke was gone. For her family and friends, the discovery brought a wave of grief that words could not fully capture. Hope, however fragile, had kept them moving through the days of searching. That hope was now replaced with devastating certainty. For investigators, the focus shifted sharply. Now there was a body. Now there was a location. Now there was a crime scene. The question was no longer where is Brooke, but what happened to her, and who was responsible. The location of the pond became critically important. It was not remote. It was accessible. And it was close to where Brooke had last been seen alive. This proximity raised immediate questions about timing, transportation, and opportunity. Investigators revisited Barnes-Morris with renewed urgency. They reviewed his statements again, comparing earlier interviews with new information. Inconsistencies became more apparent. Witness statements about his remarks took on greater significance. Police also examined surveillance footage again, this time with a narrower focus, vehicles, movements, and time windows that aligned with the discovery. The case was tightening. The medical examiner conducted an autopsy to determine the cause of death. While specific details were not widely released, authorities confirmed that Brooke's death was being treated as a homicide. That confirmation gave investigators the legal framework to escalate the case. Publicly, police remained cautious. They avoided speculation. They emphasized facts. But behind the scenes, the evidence was pointing towards someone Brooke knew. As news of Brooke's death spread, the community mourned. People who had walked the same streets, passed the same intersections, and lived nearby struggled to process how something so tragic could happen so close to home. Vigils were held. Messages of remembrance appeared online. Brooke was remembered not as a headline, but as a person, someone with a life, relationships, and a future that had been taken. For investigators, emotion could not interfere with the work ahead. They began assembling a comprehensive case, combining Brooke's documented fear, witness statements, digital evidence, and the circumstances surrounding the discovery of her body. The pressure to act was immense. With the discovery of Brooke Strattan's body, the investigation entered its most critical phase. What had once been built on concern, fear, and unanswered questions was now grounded in physical reality. Investigators no longer searched for Brooke, they searched for the truth of what had been done to her. Law enforcement began by reconstructing the final days of Brooke's life in precise detail. Every hour mattered. Every interaction mattered. Detectives reviewed timelines repeatedly, aligning witness statements with phone data, surveillance footage, and known movements. At the center of this reconstruction was James Barnes-Morris. By this point, he was no longer just a person of interest. He was the primary focus of the investigation. Police revisited their earlier interviews with him, comparing his statements before Brooke's body was found with those given afterward. Investigators often look for consistency, or the lack of it. Small contradictions can reveal far more than outright denial. According to investigators, Barnes-Morris's explanations began to unravel under closer scrutiny. Detectives also collected testimony from people who had interacted with him in the days following Brooke's disappearance. Several witnesses described comments that were deeply unsettling. These statements, while not direct confessions, suggested knowledge that investigators believed only the person responsible would have. One comment in particular stood out, a remark about weeds in a pond, interpreted by investigators as a reference to body disposal. When viewed in isolation, such a statement might be dismissed as dark humor or poor judgment. But when placed alongside Brooke's documented fear and the location where her body was found, it took on a far more serious meaning. Investigators also examined Brooke's journal entries again, this time through a forensic and legal lens. Her words documented a history of violence and fear. Brooke Strattan's story is not defined by the crime alone. It is defined by the warnings she left behind, the fear she expressed, and the life that should have continued. Her case stands as a reminder that danger does not always look dramatic, and that fear expressed quietly can be just as urgent as fear screamed aloud. In the end, justice came in the form of accountability, not closure. And Brooke is remembered not as a headline, but as a person whose life mattered, and whose story deserves to be told truthfully. Brooke Strattan's case reminds us that some warnings are written in silence. Fear does not always come with bruises others can see. And by the time the truth becomes undeniable, it is sometimes too late. If stories like this matter to you, remember the names behind the headlines, because awareness can be the first step toward prevention. This was the story of Brooke Strattan, and she would never be forgotten. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more case reports.